I'm sorry, Google Meet. Let's get started with workforce development. Now, Kelly, you mentioned that Katie Drake is not here today. We have other business for them?
Yeah, we have, just bear with me 1 second, just gotta get it moving on this computer. Okay, so they have 2 resolutions. Katie had planned on coming to our September economic development meeting to talk to all the committee about what the workforce development does with the services they provide, because they have a new administrator that's going to be starting, or a director, I should say. And so she wanted to give him time to get his feet wet before they come to speak to the committee. So the first order of business is actually appointing Chris Nardone from Columbia Green to the Workforce Development Board. He's going to be starting the position of the director on June 15th. So we just need a motion for that.
Okay. Can we get a second?
Who made the first motion? I'm sorry.
Rick made the first.
Okay.
John Wiley making the second.
Okay. All in favor? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Okay. So then they also have members that are up for reappointment that have been on the committee for a few years, and they're just looking to reappoint these folks that represent part of the workforce out there.
Mm-hmm.
Can everyone see it?
I can see it. Any discussion? Is there any discussion? Can we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to reappoint.
Can we get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Okay. Or popped up. Okay. All right. Then we'll move on.
Motion carries.
I have a quick dumb question. Have they all been asked to serve?
Yes. Well, the people that are already on it's just renewing. Yes. So she checks with them. Katie's very thorough with her program. So yeah, she definitely researches it first to make sure they want to be reappointed, and then she brings it to the committee.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So next up, economic development, CDC, Mike Tucker. Mike? Mike has been very busy lately. Is he still here?
Is he ever here?
He's on mute.
I'm wondering if his mic isn't working.
It says muted under his thing.
Mike, unmute.
Kelly, can you unmute him?
I can't. This program doesn't let you unmute anybody. It's the weirdest thing.
You're on your own, Mike. At the bottom middle of your screen, there might be a little microphone.
You have to pull up your picture on the side. There you go.
I thought he just went off. There you go.
How about that? Thank you.
There you go.
It's an age thing, but we have been doing quite a bit. We did want to take a brief minute to look at our financial report and our loan portfolio report. And I guess we also have the comeback committee to discuss. If you just give me one quick second here. On a financial basis, I guess, I'm not sure that information made it.
You didn't send it to me now. I was just looking quick.
Is it at the bottom of the packet, or did it not make it?
It didn't make it.
We're on budget, and we do realize that there's we've discussed with the chairman the need to reduce our county contract price. We get $460,000. We've offered up and are willing to take a 20% reduction. That's $92,000. I was able to secure for CEDC a $68,000 PPP loan, which we believe will be forgiven based on the usage of it for rent and salaries and benefits. We think that we will be able to continue to provide the same level of service, even with the gap between the 68,000 and the 92,000, primarily because, as you recall, last year, 2 years ago, when we had a sale of land, there was $180,000 that CEDC designated $60,000 a year for 3 years as a fund to support projects that we did in partnership with the Board of Supervisors. We did not use those funds last year because, frankly, we didn't come up with a project that we thought was worth spending the money on. So, we believe that we will continue to be able to shift some expenses, manage other costs, and utilize the $60,000 of new initiative money that we had budgeted for this year to address Corona-related relief programs and services. So, we are on budget through the year, or through April, and we have a plan. I submitted a budget to our board, which they'll review next Tuesday, and then from there, I'll submit it to this committee. But it does reflect the drop in county funding. It reflects a drop in membership dues because we don't believe our members will be able to continue to necessarily support us over other choices. And it also reflects a drop in interest income from our loan fund. The reason we did that was because the SBA, half of our loan portfolio is SBA money, and the other, or SBA loans, and the other half are county revolving loan fund loans. On the SBA side, they have relieved the borrower of payments for 6 months, but they are paying us as if the borrower was still making the payment. We felt that since the CEDC loan portfolios in many cases were 50% of the total loan to the client, we would also defer the interest on the CEDC loans for the same 6 months. The difficulty there, though, is we are not receiving interest income there, and we're not paying like the SBA is. We're not making up those payments for people. We're just pushing their loan out 6 months, but we will be losing the interest income on it.
Hey, Mike, can I just interrupt for 1 second? Can everybody mute their devices? Because there's a lot of feedback coming back. I don't know if everyone else can hear it. But if everyone can just mute their devices, that would help a lot. Sorry.
No, that's okay. So in essence, we've reduced our revenue by the $92,000 relating to the county contract. We've reduced our income about $25,000 on the membership side, about $30,000 on the loan side. We're not going to be deferring $30,000 in interest, but we do believe we will have defaults. So that adds to the additional loss in interest income. Right now, our loan portfolio is in very good shape. We only have 3 or 4 loans that are delinquent, and none are more than 2 months behind. So it's less than $5,000 on $1.4 million outstanding. The fact that there won't be any, we won't get any sense of what the default rate might be until the end of the 6 months, because the borrower on both sides of the portfolio are not obligated to make a payment till then. We're working very hard with our 60 borrowers. Martha Lane is in constant contact with them. We've been providing technical assistance to several of them, and we're working very closely to serve them while we're serving the broader county business, county businesses on a broader scale. It's very important to us that we sustain this loan program long term. One of the things we've also instituted is we took $300,000, $150,000 from each loan fund to create the rapid response loan program. We hope to make 20 loans at $15,000, where if the business owner has been in business for 2 years, is willing to personally guarantee the loan and has a credit score of 625, they can have the money in 72 hours. And it's intended obviously for businesses that are stronger and have a more likely success rate of surviving. There was a study from Brookings Institute where they took census data and put it into a computer program for every county in the country. And they have projected that we're going to lose 25% of our businesses. Even if that's a third or a quarter of what that projection was, it would be very, very difficult, and not only for those individual businesses, but for the overall economy. So we are working one-on-one with people in our portfolio so that we will not sustain a loss that would result in not being able to continue to have the loan fund evergreen over time. Any questions on the finances or the loan fund?
Hey, Mike, I have a question. This is Supervisor Hoatling. The round of grants that came through the Berkshire Taconic Foundation via the CEDC was very helpful to many of the businesses in New Lebanon. Thank you so much. We received about 10% of that grant funding. Obviously, loans are really difficult for a lot of businesses in these times because they don't know when they're going to be back to operating and having revenue to be able to pay back a loan. But the idea of a grant to cover a couple months mortgages and other expenses was very helpful. Do you know if there's a plan or an option to possibly do another round of that funding that's just a straight grant without the without having to pay it back?
You know, at this point, I'm not sure. I would say, well, two things. One, we raised $200,000. We gave out 92 loans, or 95 loans now. 40 were in the city, and the balance were throughout the county. There were only 5 towns in the county that did not have any applications. And they were the most rural and the smallest of the towns. The program was designed primarily for Main Street businesses in the hopes that by providing some support for clusters of businesses as opposed to just random businesses out in an area that they were by themselves, we could sustain the drop off of business in one of the villages or town centers of the county. I'm not sure. It was hard to raise that $200,000. There is a discussion that there may be a fund for Hudson where they may be able to access other state funds. We may be asked to have some role in that. I'm not sure at this point. We did do a grant program for the town of Germantown where a donor came forward and offered to contribute $25,000, and the community was able to raise an additional $6,000. So we just completed, using the same format and model as the countywide program for the town of Germantown, 11 grants for people there. We had that spun someone from Chatham to want to do a $15,000 grant program on Main Street. So one of the things we could look at is, are there individuals or who in each of the towns or any of, I guess, any town, we would be open to working with you to either identify someone whose focus is your community to make additional grants. But I think that, when you looked at, we were able to get the banks and the Berkshire Taconic Foundation and the Hudson River Bank and Trust Foundation was the largest contributor to the Columbia Continuity Fund, and we're very grateful to the Hudson River Bank and Trust Foundation for that. But I think the difficulty is most of those groups are getting asked by a lot of other groups. but we'll work on it. If we can get the money, we have the model to pass it out. We had a committee of 8 people from throughout the county. CEDC and our staff, we had no involvement in voting and approving, which made it, I think, a lot, the integrity of it much better. And, we did staff it and we did get the applications and processing, but we had an independent committee do the review.
Great. Well, thank you.
I just want to jump in at this point because you did mention Germantown. CEDC did a phenomenal job. They had it for us from the beginning to the end, and they made the process very simple for us here. So I would encourage all the supervisors, if you can do it, do it. Okay. Thanks again, Mike.
I do have broadband on the agenda. There was an award that was in the Kingston paper on Sunday that I shared with Supervisor Bury and Riley with respect to broadband funding for Mid-Hudson. Is it their wireless group, John?
Yeah, it appears that, Mid-Hudson works a lot in Greene County as well as Columbia County. The award was, I believe, 600,000 plus, Michael, or was it 800,000? It sounds like a lot of money, but as you know, in broadband, that's a couple miles or a small part of the wireless package. The details were not released on how much of that was Columbia versus Greene, or whether it was going to be miles of fiber versus Mid-Hudson does a lot of wireless broadband using large installations of microwave. So it might be expanding their wireless network. Anything that helps Columbia County in increasing broadband is a good thing. The people in the Mid-Hudson service area are pretty well serviced already. I have a feeling that will go mainly to our sister county in Greene for that particular award, but every little penny helps. Obviously, broadband has a lot of more demand because everybody's working at home and using these meetings and these videos. So we're stretching out what limits we did have. Consolidated, I checked in with them and I checked in with GTEL. They're both ahead of schedule on lighting up houses along their grant money routes, especially in the southwestern part of the county. GTEL's way ahead of schedule there. Consolidate's come down the middle pretty well. Frontier, which was a small provider in Columbia County, declared bankruptcy. Not sure which way they're going, Chapter 7 or Chapter 11. Not sure yet if that money that they were granted would go back to the state and perhaps put back in the program. But as Mike, we talked about, when some money came back before, the program's not really set up to redistribute that money through a phase 4 or phase 3.5. So if money comes back, there's no guarantee that's not going to the general fund's budget issues versus broadband. We've had a lot of small personal things I followed up on with Mike or in mapping, and a lot of that has to do with people who are noticing how bad their broadband is now that they're spending time up here. And most of that's within the Spectrum side of the county, which is going up the eastern part of the county. And that relates to the biggest unknown part of our broadband program, which is the Spectrum expansion, which we don't have a whole lot of detail on. Now, of course, all the companies right now have a pretty good excuse not to follow up on a lot because their service areas may be closed to customer service. Their essential businesses in part, but part of their corporate offices are not operating as usual. That said, Spectrum probably wouldn't tell us much anyway. So the great unknown on broadband in Columbia County, truthfully, besides these small grants, which are welcome, I know that there's more federal funding coming perhaps through other programs, but again, I don't see a big impact. The biggest impact will be finally cornering Spectrum into finding out what their expansion plans are in our area versus other areas. And I know that our reps are putting some pressure on them to commit to some number and plan within Columbia County.
Thank you, Supervisor Riley. The other aspect of broadband is that, as you point out, the fact that many of us are home working, many of us have children at home working, doing schoolwork. There is a new awareness of the weakness of our broadband infrastructure. And I have had conversations with both Steve Mann in Senator Schumer's office and Sarah Roberts in Senator Gillibrand's office, as well as Representative Delgado through his Small Business Advisory Committee, that as part of a federal program, they should begin to assist New York, who took the great leap and lead in starting it and doing a very good job advancing it. But there's never enough money to reach the ultimate goal. So, perhaps one of the positive things that might come out of all of this would be some additional broadband funding. Any other questions on broadband? If not, I have housing update on the agenda. You may recall that Chairman Morrell had asked myself, Supervisor Shamides, Supervisor Adams before she became supervisor from Habitat for Humanity, and Commissioner Gibson from the Department of Social Service to meet to continue a dialogue as to issues relating to affordable housing in the county. In that context, the county, as you will recall, did this committee was put together, or subcommittee was put together after the county completed a extensive housing study. Shortly after the county's housing study, the city of Hudson's mayor had a housing task force and did a study of needs in the city. I think that one of the issues we have is that 60 to 70% of the housing stock in the county is 1940 and earlier, particularly in the city. Supervisor Shamides had discussed with me at one point before all of this interruption, the fact that the city was looking to do a RFP to take the data from the county and city studies to help identify several possible sites that might be attractive to hope to attract a developer to explore and develop. At that time, we had a discussion about the fact that perhaps while they were doing that study, we could get some economy of scale by looking at where there are sites in the county, recognizing that due to the limitations of water, sewer, gas, electric, and broadband, that it would not, the extra look at what might be available in those several towns that have those infrastructure improvements might be cost effective. I think the city is, and Supervisor Shamides certainly should weigh in here. I think they're getting ready to move forward. My thought with all that's going on, that if they do move forward with that RFP, as they identify responses and narrow the selection process, that we could perhaps, if this committee and the county wants to take this further, look to have a discussion with the consultant as to what it would cost to add that component to the study. That would take the pressure, it would let the city move forward in a timely manner, and at the same time, I don't believe that with everything going on, that the county can really be distracted by trying to decide what to do here. So I added that for that purpose. Michael, I know I exchanged an email with you, but I'm not sure, if that's a plan that you think might work, or whether you had another suggestion.
I think that makes sense. I think to clarify what we see as the next steps for the city of Hudson is that working with the county, we identified a bunch of possible parcels that we thought could be developed. And then in conversations with the state and with potential developers, it seemed like some additional work needed to get done to further refine sort of what are the best matches, and then also ideally come up with multiple sites that could address sort of like the diversity of our housing needs. The county study identified 3, or depending on how you slice it, 4 different priorities for the different types of housing that we need. And we likely wouldn't make sense to put them all on a single site. So ideally we'd identify several different sites that could identify the diversity of needs that we have, and then pair those with potential developers as well as specific funding cycles from New York State. So we could kind of create a queue to be like, these are our 4 projects, and then there's these 4 funding cycles that we'd sort of develop and apply for them in line. And I certainly think that makes sense to expand it beyond the city of Hudson. I think there's a lot of properties outside of the city of Hudson that could work, and the need for housing is much bigger than the city of Hudson. So we certainly would like to expand that as much as we can if there's interest from the county. And as you mentioned, sort of economy of scale, I think we could get more work done at a lower price if we collaborate.
And in speaking with Commissioner Gibson in advance of this meeting yesterday, we both agreed that it's be very difficult. We don't want to force a discussion of this while the county is trying to work through all of the COVID issues that it's addressing, but that this would give us some time to socialize it here, the idea, get some feedback from supervisors, particularly those in the 3 or 4 towns that have the necessary infrastructure, and then make a decision as the city moves forward with their potential consultant.
And I think also might be worth mentioning the price range that we're thinking about. So it was suggested to me that we could do the Hudson study for $30,000. So if we added on, a county portion, maybe it would, depending on how large that scope is, it could be a lot smaller. Arguably you could look at the village of Chatham, just to throw that out as one example, for a much smaller price than 30. And if CEDC sort of already has some money set aside for housing development, it could sort of fit in within a budget line if the county wanted to move forward on that.
Right. Remember, Will, if you recall that, once we got through the bulk of the broadband initiative, one of the areas of focus that the county this committee had asked us to focus on was housing. And that's how I got involved with Commissioner Gibson on the committee I just described. So again, it wouldn't be funding from the county general fund. It would be a CEDC initiative using the funds that we had allocated to coordinate with this committee as to how to spend them. The next topic on our agenda is what has consumed most all of us in various capacities for the last 8 to 10 weeks. I was very honored to be appointed by Chairman Morrell, along with Jeff Hunt, the president of the chamber, to serve as co-chairs of the Board of Supervisors Columbia Comeback Committee. The committee includes Supervisors Ligonia, Bury, and Hoteling. And it also includes a number of county department heads. We have Ann Cooper from Tourism, Bill Black from Emergency Management, and Jack Mabb as the Director of the Department of Health. We have EJ Keeler and Holly Tanner on the committee. And then we have 17 business people representing a variety of industry sectors, from agriculture to retail to construction to professional services and the like. We had an initial meeting a week ago Monday. We had about 40 people on the Google chat room here, and we had at one point 190 people on the YouTube channel watching. That meeting resulted in us scheduling 4 meetings to focus in on the 4 phases of the governor's reopening plan. The first phase, which actually opened this morning, was construction and manufacturing, forestry, agriculture, some hunting and fishing, and then retail curbside service. So not only are restaurants now, restaurants were allowed to provide retail takeout or restaurant services at the curbside. Now, everyday merchants who weren't essential businesses are also included. In the packet was a outline that we had put together to be able to, if we just go back, Kelly, one more. We wanted to have 7 goals. Here we go. Minimizing the spread of the virus being the first and most important, understanding state regulations and keeping stakeholders updated. Helping businesses adapt to this new norm. And we've done a lot of that with over 228 businesses. Coordinating countywide collaboration and development of central resource hubs. I think our grant program fell into that. Our rapid loan program fell into that, as well as the website that Blast Marketing did for us pro bono, and the business study that the George Wachtel's firm, research advisors from New York City, provided. Mr. Wachtel is a resident of Ghent, and he did that study for us pro bono as well. Moving forward, we wanted to be sure that we were able to provide input and information to people who were looking for assistance, and we wanted to be able to set realistic expectations. And with that is some of the work we've been doing with these meetings with the 4 phases, because of the fact that, number one, the governor only opened those 4 or 5 business sectors today. The theory is that he will open up phase 2 in 2 weeks, phase 3 2 weeks later, and phase 4 further out. The issue in phase 2 and primarily is retail, and good news for some of us, including myself, is barbershops, salons, and professional services. The professional services, and then in the 3rd category are, restaurants, and 4th category is arts, culture, and recreation. The issue with many businesses is that there's some part of both. So, if you take a place like Olana, they're a state park, so they can be open now, but they can't have their cafe opened. They can't give tours of the building. And we were talking, but can they bring their office workers back under phase 2? And so when we've had these conversations, many businesses have multiple components that fall into different buckets. And so as a result, there are a lot of questions. There's a lot of state guidance out there, but helping people wander through some of this stuff. Each business, whether you're an essential business that's already been opened or one that's now allowed to open, is going to have to read an 11-page document of guidelines and affirm it in writing, and create a written health safety management plan for their business, and have that available for state inspection, or I guess local health department inspection, if that's required, and then institute a tracking system where every employee coming into the building has to have their temperature taken and recorded every day, and keep a log of anyone they came into contact with, so that if someone becomes infected at your business, the tracer can come and get all that information and advise the people that you had come in contact with that they need to consider quarantine.
Hey, Mike, can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
So like we as a town hall, we have, 8 employees. When we get to be able to reopen, we have to have a full-time staff member at the front door taking a log of everyone who comes in and taking their taking the temperature of all the employees. Is that accurate for small towns?
Well, what they suggested for employees, and the question does come up whether visitors are required, but certainly you're only going to be allowed to open at 50% of your maximum occupancy. So, if your building inspector, based on your square footage, says that, you can only have 4 of those 8 people there, the others are going to still have to work from home. So we can help on an individual basis. We can help you work through these things. Ed Steffler in our office, who used to work in the county planning department, has kind of set up a program for our office to come back, and he's available to answer some of these questions in more detail. But one of the suggestions was that you have your employees take their temperature at home, and then they email it in, and you'll have a record of it. I guess the only way you're going to get caught, if you want to look at it that way, is if someone in your office gets sick and they come looking for where was your plan. The state's not going to approve your plan, because I think that then there'd be legal liability that if they looked at your plan and it wasn't adequate, why didn't they tell you about it? And they're not going to have enough people to read them all.
So because we just started working on our plan through the template from New York State. So basically we're going to adopt this plan as a town board. No one's going to come inspect it. And then if someone gets sick, we're going to be held liable that it's sufficient and that we were following it.
Well, that's when they're going to look at it, whether they determine, and it's pretty basic, as you know. But think about this. One of the questions that came up is, if this continues through all 4 phases, and you have a wedding, who's going to have the master list of guests? Who's going to have the caterer, the officiant, the person to put the chairs up, the people who delivered the food? I mean, it's going to be a nightmare. But for now, that's the process they're going through, and we're happy to help you or businesses in your communities without getting into a lot more of the nuances of it.
Michael, John Riley, a follow-up. Do we know where town governance is actually in what phase? I don't ever see it listed to when we can, even if we can hold meetings safely, when we can do so. It doesn't seem that we're included on the phase.
I would say professional services, but I will double check and get back to you if that's not the case.
Supervisor Riley, Matt mentioned recently that was phase 2, professional service.
Okay, just making sure so I don't schedule a meeting and get in trouble.
And
we were thinking about holding parking lot meetings where we could socially distance, but I can't do that until we know what phase we're in.
I would double check that, because Chairman Morrell did say phase 2, and so I ran that by our town attorney, and he said no, it's not been defined yet. You could make an assumption that you're professional services, but the governor has not specifically addressed local government. That was our town attorney, so I don't know.
I think your attorney's right, but I would guess that if the problem is there are a lot of professional services that took the position they were essential, and the businesses that are going to have a difficult time with this. If you're an essential business and you're up and running, you still have to now take a step back, sign this attestation, and create one of these plans, and you've been operating for 8 or 10 weeks. So. Kelly, if we could just move further down. Here are the CDC guidelines that the state's imposing, and they're primarily based on new infections, healthcare capacity, diagnostic testing. Then as we discussed, you can use this as a reference, the priority industries for reopening in each region in phases. Phase 1 we discussed. Phase 2 included retail, administrative support, professional services, finance and insurance, real estate. 3, hotels and accommodations. And that was confusing to people because hotels and accommodations were considered essential businesses, but the reason they're in phase 3 is if they had a restaurant or if they had a in-house athletic equipment room, those couldn't be opened until phase 3. And then arts, entertainment, recreation, and education. But then, there has been a exemption for golf. There's been an exemption for outdoor activities where there's a lot of open space like tennis, fishing and hunting. So, what we've been advising people is read all this stuff, look at the industry association guidance from your own professional organizations, in your case, the Association of Towns and Counties, and take the best of Carson and use your common sense as to what are we doing and why are we doing it. And, we're just trying to keep us from infecting each other because you don't know if you have it. So that primarily is our update. I hope you're, we did work with Supervisor Basson on a very interesting project up in Ankrum with a manufacturer there that finally got opened today, 7 o'clock this morning. It was a point where we risked 80 jobs because they could take the equipment from that facility and take it to New Jersey or Connecticut, bolt it to the floor and never come back. And that almost happened. So thank you, Art, for your help on that.
Yeah. Well, Mike, thank you. And I just want to say that Mike's team and Dee Dee Barrett and Matt Morrell and the governor's representative and members of the governor's staff were all extraordinarily responsive. And I think we got this thing done in a way that made the mill feel pretty good. We opened this morning at 7 o'clock. So everybody here is pretty pleased.
There's such a large global, they're an international business, as you know, with multi lines of business. And my fear was when they put together, as part of our suggestion, a reopening plan for themselves, that the state might adopt that for all manufacturers, and every manufacturer but them would go out of business trying to comply with it because they were set to do just about anything you could think of to protect their employees and comply. So it got tense a couple of times because corporate in Atlanta was not giving the regional or local management, they're getting frustrated with them, and I think it all worked out well. If you're hearing anything that we're not responsive or that we need to be doing something, we can fix it if we know about it. And if there's something that we're doing that you don't think we should be doing, let us know. If we're not doing something that you think we should be doing, let us know of that as well. Because this last article, I think what's going to be very difficult for businesses is figuring out how to, right now they're trying to tread water with their fixed expenses, but as they reopen and their variable expenses go up, if their revenue isn't ramped up at the same level, they're going to go under. And several businesses on the restaurant call today, phase 3, said that they're just going to continue with takeout until they can reopen 100% because they're fearful that they'll just go into a spiral of increased expenses trying to reopen with only 10% or 20% of the tables occupied because A, they can't go over 50, and B, people aren't ready to go out yet.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. If I have any further questions, I'm happy to answer them, but
Supervisor Bury?
Yes, Mike, let me ask you one more question. How long do you think we're going to be in the comeback phase? Are we planning to stick with this until if we do have to step back again, we'll be together through that process and then help out again, getting it restarted again?
I think we will. I think Jack Mabb, with respect to the tracers, when someone asked, I think it was Supervisor Basson, were these summer duration jobs? And he said, no, well into 2021. I do think there are a number of businesses like those restaurants who have decided they've done okay, and they're not willing to put the money in to ramp back up, not knowing what the risk is of being successful. So they're going to take their powder and keep it dry for a while and either go do something else or come back. So, there will be new businesses. The fascinating thing is we've had a couple of, every once in a while we get a couple of hours to work on a new project. We have some solar projects that we've been working on. There's a proposed hotel at 620 Union Street in Hudson. There were two gentlemen who called about halfway through this process, indicating they wanted to make their investment in Columbia County rather than closer to the city. I think we will see an infusion of additional second homeowners and perhaps some back office business, but it's, it really is going to depend whether we can keep this thing down or whether it flares back up and flashes back and we have to shut down again. And I just think there's not enough federal money to keep this going and keep people at the lowest end of the economic spectrum whole. And we're in a pattern where that's the biggest concern I have is, what happens when the extra unemployment money dries up, and what happens when people are back at the 50% of income unemployment rate.
Yeah, and I understand that. The extra 600 is going to stop sometime in June.
July 30.
July 30th, okay. Supervisor Mussman, you had a question or a comment? No? Does any supervisor have anything to add or ask? Do we have anybody else here who would like to ask a question or make a comment? Well, then I would ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Thank you all.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, everybody. See you next time.